From the weirdest people to the strangest situations. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and don't be too weirded out. Maybe try to guess why these stories happened. Delusional wedding planner. This did not involve me personally, but my tutor. I'll call her Anne. She told me one of her most memorable students recently. This happened several years ago in an adult learning facility. The man in question, Kevin, was in his mid to late 30s. He seemed to be a nice guy. He spoke about his fiancée a lot and their upcoming wedding. Strangely, Kevin was organizing the whole thing. He had booked the venue, the band, the church, the cake, the flowers, and even bought a 1,400 euro wedding dress from the most expensive bridal store in town. My tutor knew the owner of this bridal store and confirmed that he had done this. As the wedding day approached, Anne noticed Kevin was getting phone calls regularly in class, each making him more irate than the previous one. It turns out, it was the priest trying to arrange a date for Kevin and his fiancée to do a premarital course, which is a necessity before a Catholic wedding where I'm from. Shortly before the wedding, Kevin stopped showing up for class. Then, Anne found out why. Kevin was completely delusional. His so-called fiancée was a 16-year-old schoolgirl that he had been stalking for several months. Kevin finally approached the girl on her way home from school one day. Terrified, she told her parents straight away what just happened. Needless to say, they called the police. After they spoke with Kevin, it was clear that he had serious mental health issues, and he was committed to a mental institution soon after. He spent over 4 months in there before he was released. He returned to the course shortly after, but he was introverted and barely spoke. One day, in the middle of class, he just stood up, picked up his chair, threw it across the room, and walked out, never returning again. Anne has never seen or heard from him since. So, delusional wedding planner, let's never meet. Stranger from my childhood. As a recent lurker, I figured I'd share my own story. I don't remember much of this happening and was too young to know what was going on, so a lot of this is based off my mom's memories. When I was very young, back in the early 90s, we didn't have a landline. I wanted to talk to my grandma, who did have a landline, and while my mom was busy painting the shed in the garden, I took the liberty of coasting out the front door to access the public telephone box located at the end of the block. Without knowing my grandma's number, I could barely read. As someone had left the gate unlocked, presumably the postman or something, it was very easy for me to escape. I excitedly made my way towards the phone box. Roughly halfway along the block, a man saw me making a beeline for the end of the block. As I was only 3 or 4 at the time, wandering around without an adult, this naturally caught his attention. The man scooped me up and began carrying me towards the opposite side of the road, cooing. At that moment, my mom began racing up the road in my dad's car and stopped when she clocked me with the strange man. She demanded that he hand me over, and he did, claiming that he was about to bring me home. This, obviously, raised all sorts of alarm bells for my mom. How did he know where I lived? She said that while he seemed sincere, something was off, but she didn't pursue it. She continued to see him around every now and then, nothing major, until one day, about a decade later, his face was in the local newspaper. The guy was being trailed for molesting children and was later convicted, but he has since been released after serving 4 years. If my mom hadn't noticed I was missing and gotten straight out to look for me, things could have been pretty grim. So, stranger from my childhood, let's not meet again. The tent in the trees. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I am a USAF Security Forces airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a sweltering hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off, starting on roads that we knew, finding roads that we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on before, and began to drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen or heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noises, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspen grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small, one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there was a dead body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over, no fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go! Let's get the fuck out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leaped into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. Still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, the woman's clothing was all gone, though he could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area and do not intend to.